Do you remember this guy? Quietly last week, in between these two big cards, a tragedy struck. Patchy Mix, once hailed the best fighter outside of the UFC, got cut from the UFC after a short and terrible run in the promotion. It felt like just yesterday the UFC was shoving Patchy Mix down our throats, telling us he was supposed to be the next guy at 135, to him losing to Mario Batista, to then losing to a UFC debutant, and now being silently cut from the UFC. And this cut also made me realize how many other former Bellator fighters turned UFC fighters have just not been panning out all too well in recent memory. So, of course, in today's video, let's look at Patchy Mix's career and the other Bellator ticks, like Connor used to call them, and see why they haven't been panning out all too well in the UFC recently. Alright, let's start off with the guy we all came here to see, Patchy Mix. Do you remember the hype surrounding this guy right before he was supposed to make the greatest UFC debut ever? I swear, the internet thought he was supposed to be the next guy at 135, like the next GOAT from what they were saying. Every Reddit thread thought he was not only one of the best 135ers outside of the UFC, but one of the best fighters outside of the UFC, period. So many people already said that he was UFC championship level material and could give the UFC bantamweights a run for their money. And it's kind of hard not to blame them at the time. I mean, he had a lot of finishes for 135. He beat Kyoji Horiguchi, which is a win that has obviously aged super well, with Horiguchi recently beating Tagir Ulanbekov. He also finished Sergio Pettis, Anthony Pettis' brother, who was in the UFC for a decent amount of time, and even has a win over Brandon Moreno. And he beat Magomed Magomedov twice, a guy, granted, way back when, gave Petr Yan his first pro loss on the regional scene. So even though Bellator was obviously not giving Patchy the best of the best, he was taking care of guys that were seemingly UFC level competition, and he was their bantamweight champion. And of course, when Patchy made the move to the UFC, you know Dana was all over that and tried to make Patchy a star immediately. UFC 316 was, relatively speaking, a weak card for storylines. The main event was Merab versus Sean again, which of course we've all seen before and kind of already knew how this was supposed to play out. Then you had Kayla Harrison, who we all knew was going to curb stomp and steamroll Juliana Pena, which she did. And so, of course, there was this hole in hype for this card. So Dana decided to fill that gap with a big hype train for Patchy Mix in his debut. He was all over the embedded episodes and talking mad shit on Mario Batista, also talking about the millions he made in Bellator, his accolades, and his belts. He was already overlooking Mario Batista and telling Merab and Sean to watch out, and that hype would make him a sizable favorite and would have a lot of people predicting him to win. So with all the hype, how did Patchy Mix come out to affirm that hype and silence the haters and apparently the quote-unquote casuals that didn't know him? He came out frozen. It's funny because a lot of people were hating on Mario Batista at the time for his terrible win over Jose Aldo and his lack of offense, but this night against Patchy, he looked like a striking savant. He was mixing Patchy Mix with simple straight shots too, and just better timed boxing and movement. And this was exacerbated by absolutely no head movement at all.
Patchy's not moving his head, and his feet are in cement.
I mean, just look at this opening sequence. Mario Batista lands a 1-2, which caught Patchy, and then literally does the exact same 1-2 and still gets caught stiff. And that was the story the whole night. Bautista would move in and out. His offense was pretty much behind a jab and either a right hand to the body or a right hand to the top, and that right hand literally could not miss because the target would refuse to move out the way. It was probably the worst account of lack of head movement, and he just could not find a rhythm. It was a god-awful performance from Patchy Mix, and he pretty much lost every round on every judge's scorecard. And man, to be talking all that shit on Mario Batista and claiming that he was going to go for the belt already just made this fight that much worse. And it was back to the prelims, like Connor says. Dude, Patchy went from fighting ranked number 10 Mario Batista in his debut on the main card to all the way back to the prelims on UFC 320, fighting Jakub Wiklash, who was making his UFC debut. I, like many, were still hating on Patchy Mix, but come on, he was supposed to easily win this fight against this UFC debutant. He was a giant minus 300 favorite over Jakub, and again, the people of Tapology were overwhelmingly picking Patchy to win. And again, this dude looks stuck in the mud. He just refuses to move his head and got caught a couple times from Jakub. He eventually was able to get a takedown and briefly bring this to his world, but Jakub was able to reverse the position in this first round. Granted, he continued to get the takedown in rounds 2 and round 3 and was able to control Jakub for the most part in the third and get the back, but it wasn't enough. Without the damage done, Patchy versus Jakub went down to a split decision, with the decision leaning towards Jakub. Patchy, the former Bellator champion and supposed future UFC champion, went life and death with a way less experienced UFC debutant and lost. And now, a week ago, the UFC made the call we were all expecting, and now he's out of the UFC for good. And man, what does that say about the level of competition in Bellator? Because it's not just Patchy Mix. Look at the guys coming out of Bellator in recent memory. Patricio Pitbull got dropped bad and almost finished by Yair in his debut. Granted, he did bounce back and get a win over Dan Ige. And then Aaron Pico, also granted, was looking really good against Lerone Murphy before he got starched with an insane pinpoint spinning elbow. And it's the same pattern. The hype from these Bellator fighters are through the roof when they make a move to the UFC. Then Dana and the UFC put them up against the top guys in the division immediately on the main card, and then they get outclassed, and the UFC fighters show there's levels to this shit, and then rinse and repeat. Michael Chandler was at least able to win his debut in spectacular fashion against a really good and top-ranked Dan Hooker at the time, but as he kept getting fed the top, it was clearly shown there's levels to this shit. But at least he gave us some sick moments in the UFC, so overall, I would think his move from Bellator to the UFC was a net positive for Dana and the promotion, even though his UFC career is pretty butt. So I think the best Bellator talent we've seen in recent memory has to be Michael Venom Page. He beat Kevin Holland in his debut, completely outclassed him on the striking department, took a big step up to the rising Ian Gary, and lost, which considering the run Ian Gary's on right now isn't embarrassing at all. Then he ran laps around Shera and now Jared Cannonier. He's probably not championship material whether he fights at 170 or 185, but damn, he's a solid contender that will cause a lot of the top guys problems for sure. So for the most part, why are the guys from Bellator just not that good when they come to the UFC? Okay, obviously the big one is that Bellator competition is nowhere near the competition of the UFC, but also because that competition is not that great, it leads to a lot of the top fighters of Bellator relying on their physical attributes or their talents way too much. I don't know if you guys have seen the wars Michael Chandler and Eddie Alvarez have gone through in Bellator, but they literally had no game plan. It was literally just a show of who was tougher. And this usually works for the entire Bellator career. A guy like Patchy is so dominant with his grappling that he can often steamroll guys with this one skill, especially the guys at Bellator. But as soon as he has to strike with a guy like Mario Batista, everything goes out the door because he never really had to develop his striking. So because of this over-reliance on either physical attributes or certain skill sets, when they come to the UFC, they don't often game plan, or at least game plan to the level of the other guys in the UFC. Because the guys in the UFC are not only talented in a certain martial art or very physically capable, but a lot of them have very good game plan and strategies to perfectly counter their opponent. And I just don't see that type of high-level game planning in Bellator. So, are there any fighters right now in Bellator that can make a solid move to the UFC? I think the only correct answer, and the only answer that I can see, is Usman Nurmagomedov, brother of Umar Nurmagomedov, cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov, and obviously trains in the Nurmagomedov camp. He is currently undefeated, only 27 years old, and the lightweight champ in Bellator right now. So maybe he can make a move to lightweight, and maybe we could see somebody out of the Nurmagomedov camp become champion in that division now that Islam has moved up. But again, it's just so hard to gauge these guys because they look really good in Bellator against subpar competition, but as soon as they make the move to the UFC, it's a completely different ballgame. But if anybody could do it, it would be a Nurmagomedov with two UFC greats in their corner, and also he's the brother of Umar, who's also very good too. But anyways, what do you guys think about Patchy Mix and the other Bellator ticks? Will any top-ranked Bellator fighter or champion ever make a solid move to the UFC? I know Michael Venom Page made a pretty solid move and has had a solid career in the UFC, but he isn't like championship contending material. Anyways, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on the recent Bellator moves, Patchy Mix's short but terrible career, and other things related to this video. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.